So within the United States, relationships are very, very important. So whenever you go after your clientele, it is not enough to just show your product and say what your product can do for them. That's not enough. The clients in the United States, they want real relationships where you're really close to them and they get entertained. Further relationships are built upon that, and you're basically knocking on their door continuously. For Europeans, it's considered rude if you're always calling them and asking for an appointment. But a lot of the American clientele want to know that their business is very important for you. So by always continuously knocking, continuously emailing, continuously entertaining them gives them the comfort to then do business with you, because then they have a sense of not just knowing your products, but who you are, what you stand for, the values that you have, and that they know that if they reach out to you, you will pick up that phone and you will work with them.
Welcome to Transatlantic Titans, the show for Europeans making it big in America. And here is your host, Manny Schoenhuber.
Welcome to Transatlantic Titans, the show about Europeans making it big in America. I'm your host, Manny Schoenhuber. Today, we have a very special guest who plays a crucial role in helping European companies make it big in America and navigate the complexities of doing business in the US. Aryan Dokht. Aryan, welcome to the show. Thanks a lot for being here. Aryan, before we dive into the business side of things, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about your background. Who is Aryan? What's your story? Maybe tell us a little bit about your last name, because that seems to be a tough one sometimes.
Yeah, no, thanks. So, no, appreciate it. Thanks so much for having me and for being on the show. So I grew up in the Netherlands. And the reason for growing up in the Netherlands is because my father is Iranian. My mom is American. And so it was a good place to be able to visit both countries. And while I was in the Netherlands, obviously I was born there, but also attended public school in the Netherlands and basically learned to speak Dutch. And then, of course, within the Netherlands, you have to learn a few other languages. So that was great, except I always wanted to do something different. I heard that the United States has more freedom. So moved to the States for college, enjoyed it very much. And then afterwards, Comerica Bank actually needed somebody that could speak at least another language for their European team. And it was a great opportunity because essentially then I can fly also back and forth, because they believe in understanding the whole relationship with companies to better serve the subsidiaries in the States. So joined them and been with them for 20 years and had a lot of fun.
So where are you based now?
So I'm based in Houston, Texas. So what we found out was that in Houston, there's a lot of international companies. And so it was a great fit. Also very easy to catch flights to go to, whether I'm doing domestic flights or international flights.
Okay, and you already mentioned Comerica Bank. So it's in the name, but I'm not going to make any assumptions here. You're a banker. Is that right?
Yes, I am. Yes. Commercial banker, team lead for the Europe team. Yes.
And you said, how many years have you worked for Comerica Bank now?
Yep. So I started in 2006. So I'm going on 20 years in January. It's been a while.
Years. You don't look that old, so I guess that's a good thing, right? You already mentioned a little bit, but what's your role or kind of specialty at the bank, and what makes you or led you to specialize in advising European companies, other than maybe your background of having grown up in the Netherlands?
Yeah, so within Comerica Bank, we saw back in the 60s that there was not enough banks taking care of reverse investments coming into the United States. Comerica Bank was partly created by Ford Motor Company, and so a lot of these vendors were brought into the United States by Ford. And so they essentially said, you guys need to take care of these subsidiaries of foreign companies so that they can do business in the United States. That's where it stems from. And so what we have done over the years is create a better, easier, more efficient platform. And so my role is essentially helping European companies with that platform of setting up their bank accounts and all the commercial banking arrangements that they need in order to be successful in the United States.
Okay, last question before we talk actually about your work and what the bank does and why it matters. Do you speak any other languages other than English?
So I speak fluent Dutch and obviously Farsi. And then technically I'll leave it at that. But there have been some fun events where I joined you, Manny, on some German trips where I at least know what's going on, especially if you guys are joking about me.
Yes. Especially at Oktoberfest, after a few cold ones, your German is nearly perfect. Better than mine, actually.
I wasn't going to say that, but sure.
No, all good, all good. But yeah, let's talk a bit more about your work and why it actually matters for European companies in the US to consider a banker that specializes on European businesses and not only does that, but is originally from Europe. So walk us through that. What services do you and the bank offer to European companies in the US?
Yeah, essentially what we're trying to do is create a platform that whenever they open up and get all the services at Comerica Bank, that they essentially look like an American company, that they get all the bells and whistles that an American company needs in order to be successful on the banking side, where they essentially look the same, they feel the same, they act the same, so that it's basically integrating within the business environment that they need to be in order to be successful.
And I think if I remember correctly, you also said that although Comerica Bank doesn't have any branches in Europe, your online banking and even the app, I think, is available in Europe. Is that right? Talk a little bit about that, maybe.
Yep, no, that's correct. So what we've learned too over time is that a lot of the decisions are centralized in Europe. So while they have a nice operation, a good team here in the United States, it doesn't always mean that they want the administrative burden on the entity in the United States. They want to try to help and centralize in Europe. And so we made sure that essentially they can conduct everything they need to do and see everything they need to do out of Europe. And so we made sure that the platform is available worldwide and that we are also on the App Store for mobile phones in Europe, because of course they're from a technological perspective, they are a lot more ahead and want to make sure that they have everything at their fingertips. So we made sure that that's available to them. So all the various transactions that you see in the United States is available to be conducted by the parent company or its admin team in Europe, so that the United States subsidiary can continue to do as they need to do and pay vendors, also see payments coming in from customers, that's all available to them in Europe or the United States.
And although it's probably not advisable to conduct all your American business from Europe, including your banking and financing needs, but essentially you're saying that would be possible, correct?
Correct. So basically the invoices, everything is under the U.S. subsidiary. Everything moves out of the U.S. subsidiary or into the U.S. subsidiary. That's correct. It belongs to the U.S. subsidiary. We make sure that the tools are available to whoever needs access to the tools to see the transactions, conduct the transactions, and have that as part of their information package into their accounting systems.
Okay, so let's talk about those European companies that you're advising. What do they typically look like as in size, type of business, geographic location of their European headquarters, all that kind of stuff?
Yep, great question. So from our perspective, we're very generalists in terms of taking care of those clients. And so we get all sorts of companies that come to us. What we've seen the most is that oftentimes the European companies have really nice technology, whether it's the product itself, the quality of the product, a lot of IT services, manufacturing, high-end complex manufacturing or high-quality manufacturing. We also see a lot of HR services to help with the employees, etc. So it's a little bit of everything. We even see sometimes dealerships that are trying to set up business here, automotive type manufacturing companies from Europe selling into the United States. It's a little bit of everything, but what's fascinating is always going to be high-end, complex services and products that are coming from Europe into the United States, because obviously there's a market for that and a strong need for good quality, complex things, and that's also where you're going to make your margins.
And when you think about European countries where maybe most of your clients, the companies you're working with, are coming from, what do you see there? What landscape are we talking about there?
Good question. I would say that really all of the Western EU countries have been very active in the United States. And this also includes the Southern European countries. And so we don't see as much Eastern European countries, but they're slowly starting to also start investing in the United States. But essentially what's happening and what we see is in order for them to continue to expand sales, once they have a mature market in Europe and they want to continue to increase revenues, the next viable location is the United States. I mean, obviously you have other countries in the world to go to, but the place where revenues is very consistent, very stable, currency is also pretty stable, is the United States. And so as a result of that, also the values are kind of similar. And so it's very easy to come into the United States. And Europe in itself does a good job speaking English, or they have a lot of English speakers, even if you're looking at some of the other countries where it's not native, but there's a lot of speakers. And so therefore they have the capacity from finding the right people that can then enter into the United States to sell into the United States. So the majority in our portfolio is probably all the typical Western European countries, such as Germany, such as Italy, the UK, the Netherlands. But we're also seeing a lot from France and Denmark and Belgium, and then Austria and Switzerland, a little bit on the lower level, but also heavily investing in the United States. It depends also how they themselves are doing economically. And whenever economically they're doing well, they need to expand. They need to go somewhere. And so during really good times, you see a lot of investments coming in. During recessionary times, a little bit less because of the capital needed. But they're still going to continue to invest, especially if there's no other market for them or they have the maximum market that they've achieved in Europe. The US is a very, very good and easy place for them to further their revenues.
Yeah, and I think that is also important to note that there's maybe a certain geographic focus, but you're industry agnostic, right? You're a service provider that can help all of them. So let's talk about those companies entering the US market, thinking about entering the US market. When do you, as a bank, usually come into play in that market entry journey? Let me call it this.
Yeah, I think the biggest potential for them is whenever, especially the majority of the clients that reach out to us are the clients that are already buying from them or have a strong interest to buy from them, but really prefer to work with local subsidiaries. They want to pay in local currency. They want to pay to a local bank. They don't want to always make that international transaction. And also, they believe that if they pay locally and work with local contracts and under local jurisdiction and tax purposes, then they don't have liabilities that might be playing on the international level. And so that's very important for the American clientele. How do we get a bank account so that their clientele can pay them locally? That's probably the biggest one. The second one is they've fully expanded in Europe, maybe some other countries in the world. Now the US is the next place that they need to focus on sales. And so then they start hiring people so that the sales force can go out there and find opportunities. And so then you also have to pay them locally with bank accounts and provide them with resources locally so that they can do their travel and entertainment or go to certain conferences, etc. So it's very important that they have that access and capacity to work with the local bank.
Okay, and I think you already just confirmed a few of the topics that are crucial that may be underestimated by European companies. Travel and entertainment, certain expenses that need to get paid and should get paid locally may not be as important in Europe, but in the US, they're essential, right, for growth. and success. So maybe one other question, just for clarification. You do advise your clients nationwide in the US, right? Or you're limited to any states, any geographic regions? Of course, you'll probably have a focus closer to home, closer to headquarters. But what about your geographic reach within the US?
So that's a good question and a very good point. So within the United States, relationships are very, very important. So whenever you go after your clientele, it is not enough to just show your product and say what your product can do for them. That's not enough. The clients in the United States, they want real relationships where you're really close to them and they get entertained. Further relationships are built upon that, and you're basically knocking on their door continuously. For Europeans, it's considered rude if you're always calling them and asking for an appointment. But a lot of the American clientele want to know that their business is very important for you. And so by always continuously knocking, continuously emailing, continuously entertaining them gives them the comfort to then do business with you, because then they have a sense of not just knowing your products, but who you are, what you stand for, the values that you have, and that they know that if they reach out to you, you will pick up that phone and you will work with them. The feedback is important, et cetera. And so one of the things that the bank does, because obviously our main market is going after the American companies, well, we have lots and lots of training, lots and lots of focus of teaching our teams to basically be continually out in the market, talking to our clients all the time. Once you know that you have done lunches and dinners with American companies, that's whenever you are at that stage where highly likely you'll have a relationship with that American company. So to answer your question, I can say, sure, Houston is a great place, but Houston should only be considered if your clientele are sitting in Houston. But if your clientele are sitting in Chicago or New York or Miami, my suggestion would be to sit closer to them. Now, granted, a lot of times clients will sit all over the country. And so then I would suggest, doing your market research, finding out where they sit, but maybe consider being somewhere in the middle of the country, close to very good airport hubs, so that you can get to your clients very quick. Other clients will hire a couple of guys throughout the country and not all sit in one office. And so that's another thing that's been very successful for some of the clients that we have. So going after the clients is great, but make sure that you actually sit pretty close to the client.
And how about you and the bank? Does it matter where I have my geographic location in the US, or can I work with you guys nationwide? What's the markup for your branches or your geographic reach on the banking side in the US? Does that matter? Are you clients from north to south, east to west, coast to coast, so to speak, in the US?
No. So while we're in many states in the United States, we're located in 11 states, what I tell my clientele is, from a banking perspective, you want to make sure that everything is as electronic as possible. And so not just so that you don't have to come to me to deposit your check, but more than anything, in order to receive payments, it's not an issue whether you sit on the East Coast or the West Coast. Payments can go out very easily throughout anywhere in the region and received anywhere in the region. So from that perspective, you can sit anywhere in the United States and easily conduct bank transactions. And so therefore, you don't need to sit close to where a Comerica branch is. What's important is whenever you just have a lot of cashier's checks, that's the only thing that you would need a branch for. But, that's old school. And so there are other solutions, such as wires or real-time payments, to make sure that the payments are within seconds on the bank account, either your bank account or the recipient's bank account.
Yeah, maybe talk about this for a second. Why do you think Americans or American businesses still have such an affinity to checks, whether cashiers or personal checks? I mean, I know that there's grandparents giving their grandchildren still, instead of cash, cold hard cash, as we would say, you're getting a personal check. Or at the first firm that I was working with as a lawyer when I started out my career, and I needed a reimbursement for a business expense, for example, they actually handed out checks that I then, of course, with my phone was able to take a picture of, so I didn't have to go to the bank teller and cash it in. But why do you think that is in the US? Because you mentioned we have ACH, we have wire, classic online banking approaches that we also know from Europe. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. So within the United States, just to talk about what are the different categories and the percentages that go with categories. So electronic payments are very popular these days. The United States banking system is not very old. It's just the mentality sometimes of checks that starts looking old. So in the United States, B2B, I would say about 65% is with ACH. And that's my recommendation to all companies. Whenever they're having their discussions with their clients or vendors to always discuss payments upfront and to make sure that you know where you stand and whether your client or supplier stands, so that there's no surprises down the road. And ACH is what we certainly highly recommend. The next thing is wires. So in order to do international payments, the only method really is international wires. And so that's a little bit expensive, but something that is only used. Even if you're dealing with Canadian clients or vendors, you can do ACH, but it's tricky. Actually, the Federal Reserve won't allow ACH from the United States to Canada anymore, but they allow Canadians to send ACH back over here. Wires, just focus on wires in that case. Going to checks, there's still about 10 to 15% of checks that's being used in the United States. Part of it is because it's an old mindset. Oddly enough, there's a generation out there that enjoy signing the check and sending out the check, believe it or not. But also they get the benefit that it takes a little bit of time before it gets to the recipient, and then it takes the recipient maybe 1 or 2 days before they put it in their bank account. So we call it floating. So essentially there's floating funds that the client gets to keep longer in their bank account. But the bigger issue is there's also a lot of parties out there that abuse their banking relationships. And so whenever they abuse their banking relationships, all of a sudden, let's say they abuse the banking relationship with someone, that bank closes out the bank account. And then there's a system in the United States called check systems. And we banks can all see whether that particular business or individual abused their bank relationships. And then we are discouraged of not opening up that bank account. So then the only payment that you can receive at that point is either checks. And so also there's some government agencies in the United States that can only accept checks. Oddly enough, they take pictures of the checks and put that on their system to say payment was received, and that's what the payment looked like. So, but I would say, again, it's 10 to 15%. Talk about it up front with your clients or with your vendors that you really prefer electronic payments, because if that payment doesn't get to the recipient, you are still liable for that payment, whether it's stolen, whether it's missing, whatever the case might be. You might see that the funds are no longer in your bank account, but if the recipient doesn't have it on their property, in their bank account, it never happened. And so you still owe them a payment. And that can turn into turn a relationship really into a sour situation, because then you have to deal with legal matters to pursue that.
That sounds familiar, actually. Yes. And I would have to say that from a purely percentage standpoint, the most bank fraud cases that I've dealt with, that I've personally dealt with, where customers didn't get paid or clients didn't get paid, or because of check fraud rather than wire transfer fraud. Yes, those happen as well, right? But maybe we're just getting those because, yes, I can see how it's a very administrative, authentic act, ministerial act almost, to sign a check and then hand it over, almost like, hey, good job, well done, here's your check. But I think from a business standpoint and a mindset of trusted relationships, right, it's risky business, really.
We have, because as a European, you would say, oh, man, that's really old. What are you guys doing? But, oddly enough, there is a lot of technology around it too. So like if you're the one that's sending out the check, banks do have protective technology around it where basically you have to put it on the system of what's the amount, what's the check number, when did you write it? You have to put this all on our database so that if we receive it, we will pay it and who the payee was. So there's a lot more going on. It's not just like, oh, there's an old system out there. What are you crazy American banks doing? There's a lot of technology around it too. And like you said, nowadays you can take a picture of the check as well and deposit into your bank account if you're the client and you receive the check and quickly put it into your bank account. So number one, we're reducing that float. Number two, if you do have to write checks because of the purchasing power that you're dealing with your client or your supplier, and they say you have to do it, just make sure that whichever bank you're using, that you have those protected services around your bank account, because that really reduces a lot of the fraud situations. But again, the reason why Europe got rid of it was because checks do get stolen. A lot of fraudsters out there that are doing some interesting things with those checks. And so the best thing is try to avoid it if you can.
Well, let's stay on the subject of protective measures for just another minute, because every now and then we hear on the news, whether here in the US or in Europe, about banks failing in the US, right? I think it was during COVID or shortly thereafter when another very, I'm not going to name any names here, but a bank that seemed to be popular with startups and scale-ups went belly up and everybody was afraid about their money. Maybe talk a little bit about what the Germans call Anlagesicherheiten and kind of the security, what's insured, how much of my money that I keep in your bank account at the bank is actually insured by the FDIC. Does it matter whether it's a personal account or a commercial business account? Maybe talk about this for a little bit, because if I'm a European company transferring a few $1,000,000 over from the German or Dutch or Swedish bank account to you at Comerica Bank, I want to know what happens if in the unlikely situation that something goes wrong at the bank, that I'm protected either by the United States government or otherwise. Talk a little bit about that.
Nope, that's a great question. So within the United States, all the banks basically have an insurance with the Federal Reserve. So we call it FDIC. And so make sure that you see the logo with the FDIC with whichever bank you're working with. Even so, the insurance is up to $250,000. That's protected. Now, interestingly enough, what you can do too, if that is an issue, you can have multiple bank accounts, but to make sure that at the different banks that you're going to have a bank account is protected up to $250,000. But banks have solutions for that as well. So let's say that you're looking at having multi-million-dollars in your bank account. One of the things that banks have is that we can actually invest it in a kind of what we call FDIC insured money market account. And what we do is every night we take that money and we, on your behalf,
Physically.
invest it with. Yep.
Physically.
Electronically, physically. Basically put it with multiple banks that night, and each bank then has $250,000 that night that they got from your fund, so that if something were to happen, you're covered 100%. So we do that for clientele that have huge deposits with us. Well, that's one thing to help. The other thing to do is, if you don't want to get into that kind of intricacy, is that you look at the rating of the bank, you look at the history of the bank, and you kind of see what's their performance been, are they diversified, and what's their credit rating. So what you will see is most of the banks are going to be BBB plus or better in the United States from a investment grade. And so just for purposes of whether your money is safe or not, you're talking about you're in a very high investment grade environment with the funds. Well, the issue that happened at the time was just that, whenever interest rates change dramatically, that's whenever it's where you have to look and see, does the bank you're working with have a sound investment plan in place? And certainly we all talk about it as banks. We talk about the investments that we do, how liquid they are, and then what's our capital reserve ratio. And so those are just a few points to look at in an investment grade. And then just to make sure that you also have a lot of dialogue with your banker. I know that bankers, I'm not going to say boring, but it's not a topic that's always fun to talk about. But at the end of the day, if you're looking at your revenues and you're looking at your cash position and your balances, you do need to make sure that you talk to your banker from time to time and ask for the performances and ask for where do they stand on the rating and especially how they compare to their peers.
Okay, so maybe another important point for European companies or US subsidiaries that are owned by European companies or ultimate beneficial owners that have European citizenship. Why may it not even be possible to work with the big banks, the really, really big banks? You guys are also quite a big bank as compared to European standards or even international standards in general. But why may it not work for me to just get off the plane in New York and say, hey, I have my US subsidiary now. Let me walk into the XYZ big bank branch office and talk to the teller or the branch manager and ask him to open up a commercial bank account for me. Why does this sometimes not work? And why, if it works, do I run the risk that my bank account gets closed again after a few weeks or even after a few months? What's the reasoning behind that?
So basically, especially since 2001, compliance has become a real topic by all the various governments and all the regulators involved around it. And so over the years, certainly a lot of banks have been penalized for not doing a proper job on the compliance. And oddly enough, sometimes they actually did do a good job, but it was insufficient by the regulators. And so as a result of that, they had huge penalties. So bankers in general face a couple of things. They face, as an institution, they get penalized, and also as an individual, we get penalized. And so we also face imprisonment, oddly enough, as a banker that does something that's wrong in accordance to the regulators. While all of us bankers have all our databases and we run all the names through the databases and we try to figure out to make sure that there's no one on the blacklist, no involvement with anything on the blacklist. We try to look abroad and see what the blacklists are in Europe and make sure nobody's on the blacklist over there and several other places. But there's still limitations around being able to do that. And there's still limitations around what will happen in the future with those bank accounts. And so for some banks have decided that essentially it's not worth the risk, especially if the company is only going to have, even if it's $250,000, or let's put even $1 million or $2 million in that bank account. Is the reward enough to basically take care of that relationship? And so that's what banks are facing. And that's why it's not an easy thing to just jump off the plane, go to a branch and then open up the bank account and think everything is going to be dandy and fine, even if you take a couple services with that bank and pay for those services. These days, banks are looking at the risk versus reward with the relationships. Obviously, we feel like we have made sure from a compliance perspective, we got some pretty tough databases that we put these names through where we feel like we've done a sufficient job to adhere to that. And then the other thing we do, every 2 to 3 days, all those names go through that same database so that we continuously keep track of what's happening. And so several banks are doing this, but that's a very costly feature to have every night or every few nights for these names to run through. And so some banks have decided that even if there's more services involved with it, it's just not, the reward is not enough to offset the cost and the risk involved to have such a relationship. That's why I always mention to a lot of others to basically, before you just open up a bank account, that you fully are aware that, number one, you're working with a commercial banker. You're working with a commercial banker that has opened up several other bank accounts with foreign-owned subsidiaries, that they have experience with, if there's a situation, how to solve the situation. And certainly, while branches have very good people at them, just ask them, whether the branches can take care of their business while they sit back in Europe. And that's where a lot of things go wrong, because a branch doesn't give you access online, and a branch, the compliance requirement for most banks is at the branch. If you need changes, you need signer changes, you need service changes, you need to do a wire transaction, branches require you to come in, and a commercial banker does not per se, but less so. And it depends again on the bank itself. But most commercial bankers, we work with a bit bigger companies, and they don't have the time to stop what they're doing to come see us bankers. And so commercial bankers are set up to be able to do more of remote assistance to companies. So make sure, and if they have an international department, that's even better, because then you know that they're going to ask certain questions, and that's important to them to continue to take care of your business. And so you don't have that situation later on where they say, we're not interested anymore. If you still don't know, or you're still not sure as a company, you're talking to somebody, he is a commercial or she is a commercial banker and has some experience, just also be upfront that, you're going to conduct the transactions through the subsidiary, maybe in the EU, or you're going to have individuals that are non-American on the bank account, whether that's permissible or not. And what it would take to change the signers, because we do see turnover with companies. And so whenever all of a sudden, if your CFO leaves, or you have somebody in the United States and that individual leaves, it's a major hassle to then stop everything you're doing and fly to the United States to change that. We do everything remotely at our institution. There are some other banks that do it also remotely. So we always recommend just try to connect with those, because it will save you a lot of time and headache.
One other subject that comes up quite frequently that us Europeans may not be as familiar with, but is the whole idea of a credit score, whether it's personal, but also a credit worthiness as a business, as a subsidiary of a European company. Maybe explain that for a little bit. What do you, from a banking perspective, understand that to be, and why is it so important for European companies that are looking to grow, that are looking to make it big in America?
So in the United States, it's all about proving yourself. So you kind of have to prove that you have a history of doing, being financially sound as an individual and as a company. And so as an individual, you get scores. As a company, you get references. So as an individual, we have a point system to keep track. And the only way we can keep track as institutions is with a Social Security number. That's a tax number that you get from the IRS within the United States. And so whenever you get your first score, because you just got your Social Security number as an individual, it's going to be very poor. You have to prove to the system that you are responsible with your credit. You are responsible of earning as well and paying your debt properly.
Which we Europeans tend to be, right?
Yeah, in fact, and that's the other thing, is Europeans tend to avoid having debt and prefer to pay everything with their debit cards. But in the United States, it's a little bit different. In the United States, it's a silly business, but essentially the financial institutions want to know that, first of all, you can get debt. Second of all, that the banks can make some money off of you. And so, we always advise, once you have your Social Security number, get a credit card as fast as you can. Even if you have to do cash secured, get it as fast as you can.
Should come with your Visa, actually, right? Welcome to capitalism. Here's your credit card.
Yep, that would be great. But then also to start using it, and oddly enough, don't pay it off everything at the end of the month. Let's say most of the time you get a $500 cash secured credit card. Totally fine. Just do it, whatever, get it done. Just get that card. Then start using it, whether it's for your gasoline or whether it's just to get your shopping done, grocery shopping and whatnot. But at the end of the month, just keep $10 on that credit card. And what's odd about it is the banks will see that you are very responsible for paying down your credit card as much as possible, but that you still leave a balance on there so that bank can earn something. It's pennies, of course. That is to them the most responsible individual with their credit. And then at some point you have to get your car, finance your car. But then once you do those two, and 2 credit cards, by the way, 2 credit cards, and at some point a car loan, 18 months with a decent salary, you will be able to be eligible to finally get a mortgage in the United States, because that's always the first question. Hey, can I get a mortgage so I can buy a house? Nope. It's going to take you 18 months. You have to do those 3 things first, the 2 credit cards and a car loan. Be responsible with it, let them earn just a tiny bit. And then, eventually you get to 700. 700 is that score that you need in the United States. The most you can get is 850. 700 is a good average. And then you can get a mortgage. If you're under 700, you can still get a mortgage after 18 months, but interest rates are going to be higher for that. A little bit subprime. So not as good as average. Anyway, and keep track. As an individual, keep track of that credit score through those 18 months. Make sure you're doing all the right things. On the company side also has a similar situation, but not exactly with a score. It's more like with certain agencies that will follow the trend of the companies. And so in those cases, that's more of keeping your reputation in good shape and also getting a revolving line of credit. One of the ways we help our clients is to get a commercial card for the company as soon as possible, because that can be seen on some of the databases and make sure there's no issues with those databases. And that's how we help our clients to also establish something quick. Again, another one of those things where, it takes 18 months to build that up. But then as you are negotiating with your suppliers, because you're wanting terms with them, a lot of them, especially the bigger companies, will look at those databases and double check. And they will also ask for bank references. And so bank references, you talk to your bankers, they will help with that. And you need credit lines so that the vendors can see that you're doing a good job and that a bank essentially trusts you to provide an open credit line. So those are the things that I would do as soon as you hit the ground in the United States from a business level and individual level.
And of course, as a lawyer, I have to say that we're not giving any financial advice on this show, right? This is just some lessons learned from the experience that you made. Yes, it's just different, right, from what we know in Europe. Say, whether you think it's good or bad, it doesn't really matter. We just have to adapt to the situations that we're facing. So maybe to close the loop here on talking about banking in general, and then I'd like to dive more into the maybe success secrets and success stories you've seen with other European companies. But as you know, one of the questions us advisors in general always get asked by our European clients, and we should get asked because we're all about full disclosure, but what does it cost? What does it cost me to have a bank account, a commercial business bank account in the US? Of course, yes, the lawyer again says it depends, and you'll probably say that too. But if you can give a wide range, we all know the US is more expensive than Europe. We all know that this is a much larger, bigger country than the different European countries. But maybe talk about costs in general when it comes to just your basic banking needs as you're entering the US market, and then maybe as you grow, what you see that other companies are doing or are needing from you as their banker.
Sure. Not an easy question. Maybe one of the things that a company needs to decide on is what is their volume. So in the United States, essentially nothing is free. So that's, as long as you keep that in mind, then you can kind of, not have a sticker shock, essentially. And it's not that it's costly in the United States on the banking side. It's not. But what we do is, for everything that we do, there's a cost involved. And so one of the first things we bankers will ask the client is, what's the volume? What's the volume of transactions, and how much do you think you're going to put into your bank account? Part of that is the volume for all those different things that we talked about, the ACH, the wires. There's a cost involved with all of those things. Technically speaking, some of that is very cheap. Like ACH is 19 cents, or if you have a certain bank setup, it's free. Wires can be very costly. So we have essentially setups where especially in commodity type trading companies, there's a lot of wires going on. So that can be very costly. So it's very important to figure out what the volumes are and what kind of transactions your expectations are. And then as you go to the potential banks that you want to work with or get a sense for, you start asking them, you say, okay, I expect to have this much on my bank account. I expect this volume. And of course, it changes over time. And then that's another reason why you want to talk to your banker from time to time is as things change, there's different packages as well to help minimize the cost that you would incur. So just to give you a sense of what costs have looked like in the past, because again, banks have the discretion to change their pricing over time and change things up. But, these days we have for just a startup, typically we'll start around $40 a month to get all the online services available to these smaller companies. And then they can start doing ACHs and real-time payments and wires. And they'll get a little bit of those for free as part of the package. And then once they go above that level, then they'll start paying for the transactions. The next level is like $129 a month. And those are what we call bit more of the middle market. There's a lot going on. They have pretty good revenues going on in the United States. They have a good inflow of invoices. And then above that, then it just becomes a situation of where are the transactions going. We try to talk to our clients at least once a year, see where they are at, how things are going, and then adjust based on the packages and the transactions that's going on. And so again, people don't always like talking to their bankers because they got more important things to do. We get it. But if the pricing becomes expensive, we can't always, help right away to make sure that everything is adjusted in accordance to expectations.
Yeah, and of course, just for the record, for the viewers and listeners who may be listening to this or watching this video in the year 2030 or 2035, these prices are 2025 prices. So let's sit down again in 5 or 10 years, and then we'll check in with you on those dollar numbers and where we stand. But actually, it was a couple of weeks ago when somebody told me the US is not really a country. It's a business. And I think that actually puts it nicely, what you said at the outset, that nothing's for free here. There's a certain cost of doing business. So maybe one last aspect of it that segues us into the next part of the show, where we talk about the European companies that we're seeing and why it may be so important. Why would you say that a European company, you're from Europe, I'm from Europe, why do you think it probably makes a whole lot of sense to work with someone who knows your culture, understands your language as a service provider in a foreign country like the US? Why do you think that can be a certain advantage to European companies?
It really helps tremendously to have that aspect in place. A lot of times, there are a lot of really good people here as well, but their approach is going to be very different and very, maybe not as, doesn't provide the answers that you're seeking for, or has answers that come across really harsh. I've seen all of the above, where essentially the European clients I'm talking to are like, wow, that doesn't sound attractive at all. While to an American, that's like, wow, that is huge potential. So I think loss in translation happens a lot. And so therefore understanding what culturally is important and how to culturally pursue the importance, it helps a lot. And so, and this might be a topic after this, but that's why a lot of times we see that whenever they send some of their own guys from Europe to kind of be involved, that helps. It helps explaining back to the parent company what's going on, what's important, why is it important, versus sometimes hiring somebody immediately local that it doesn't have that relationship and cultural beliefs that are of the same sort.
Yeah, let's actually explore what European companies need to be aware of when doing business in the US, because our goal with this show is obviously to show the shiny, but to also show the shitty, right? So, what common mistakes do you, as the banker, see that European companies make when either expanding into the US or already being here, and what misconceptions do you they may have about the US market?
Sure. I think one of the things that I see a lot happening is that for the Europeans, if you were to say that, an American company is coming to you to sell their product to you, would you just open up your doors and let that American guy just come in and sell that product to you? The same happens over here whenever you have some of the Europeans that come over here and then they expect that the doors are open very quickly for them to sell to an American company inside the United States. It's not that easy. Essentially, what we've seen and works the best is that you technically need to consider hiring within those networks of where you want to sell, hiring people, because as I mentioned much earlier, the Americans are very relationship driven, very relationship oriented. They want to first know the individual before you see business really coming out of that. And so, sure, Europeans can come here and try knocking on the doors, and they will be successful. It just is going to take time to get into those doors and create those relationships and then be able to sell to those companies. But and that's where we see the biggest success, if you come to the United States, basically you're looking for those individuals already in those networks of where you want to be, because then you can quickly get in the door. You already know that whoever you hire knows your clientele very well, and it gives you the opportunity to be able to show your product. The other thing is, showing your product is not always just enough. It's still continue to have relationship, dialogue, conversations to sell those products. So that to me is sometimes where it takes sometimes even years for some of the clients we have before they're finally successful, finally pay themselves to build that relationship over a long period of time, or finally hire some of the local network to help them get into the door with strong relationships. That's very critical. The thing that I also find very important is it is good sending somebody from the home base, from the parent company over here to help hire those people and to provide the translation of what's going on with the team, translate it back to the parent company, have that dialogue, and then vice versa as well, expectations that the parent company has, or, obviously the metric system and the imperial system is very different. So again, somebody that's focused on that from the parent company with his or her team helps also to keep that in perspective as well, to make sure that continues to flow. So that's where I see the biggest success come from, is still keep somebody from the parent company, send them here, but hire the network here, get the right people. The second thing that I find sometimes an issue with is that they don't hire, or they only have a budget. They have a certain budget to hire the right people. Now, salaries in the United States are first of all, they vary hugely, and they can be quite expensive as well. And so
geographically within the US as well, right? Not
geographically within the industries, it depends on what you're doing. But yeah, geographically, somebody that's sitting in Louisiana is going to be differently paid than somebody that's sitting in California. The same for Texas versus Washington State. It's all going to be quite different. But the focus should always be within your industry. If you know what your target market is going to be, look and start researching what that target market salary looks like and focus on that. A lot of times what I do see is that they underestimate. If there's ever an underestimation of cost, is the salaries in the United States and the approach in the United States from expectation perspective. The feedback I get over and over again is that the salaries in the United States are much higher than in Europe. In fact, sometimes the salary of just the business development guys are as much as the executive team back in Europe. And it's important to know that what you're trying to achieve is ultimately increase your sales. That's, at the end of the day, the reason why you're looking at the US market is you're trying to go after additional revenues. And so what you want to do is, this market is very, very large and has a lot of potential for a lot of products. And so especially once you're in the right networks, that can multiply very fast. So with the right people, oftentimes I've seen where revenues doubled in 3 years, basically, of what they were making back at the parent company. Doubled in 3 years. I spoke with a Danish company yesterday, someone you know very well as well, and he essentially not only doubled the revenues in 3 years, the margin he is getting out of the United States is much higher than back in Denmark as well. So he hired the right people, did the right things, and that ultimately created very strong success for him. And I have several other clients like that. But I also have clients that basically are looking for salaries of a certain lower level. And I see statistically they struggle a little bit more than the guys that just hire the right people with the right network. And you know better than I, you can change your people to, obviously you're going to test them. You're going to see, take them on board, work with them for a period of time. If it's not working out, sever the relationship and find somebody else that can achieve the goals that you're trying to achieve here in the United States. It's very important. And it's as you said, it's a business place, business environment. Look at it as a business in the United States, and very easy to do so and very easy to change people if you need to in order to get the sales you need.
And I think it really holds true in the US in particular that you get what you pay for, right? Whether it's your service, whether it's your employee, dependent contractor, distributor, doesn't really matter. And in the legal profession, we always like to refer to the famous triangle of cheap, fast, and good. Now you get to pick 2 of those, right? You can't have all 3. So that's really the angle that I would add to it. And before we get into the next segue of the show, as you said, you've done this for quite some time now, 20 years at the bank. So how has, over those 20 years, how has the landscape for European businesses entering the US changed over maybe the past decade, over the past 20 years, as we said? What have you witnessed, so to speak?
Yeah, no, good question. I would say that whenever I started my career back in the early 2000s versus today, back then, one of the things that happens, and it goes back to relationships, it was even harder for sometimes European companies to get into those relationships. They were really looking to know the individuals that they work with before they do any kind of business with those individuals. So it was harder to get in the door. These days, it's been easier to get in the door to meet with some companies, because even though, there's a lot of media things going on, there's still a lot of business where essentially it's more important to them to have the right products and the right things in order for them to conduct their business properly. So from that angle, it's gotten a little bit better in building up relationships back and forth. So we see a lot more European companies coming into the United States than ever before, and doing very well. It takes some time, but then they do very well. Going back in those days, it took much longer for them to do as well. And oftentimes, it was really the bigger companies with bigger budgets that did a better job back in those days, that acquired entities that already had full sales staff or had to do other things in order that were more expensive to get the ball rolling. So that's changed for the better. The other thing is, oddly enough, the mentality here oftentimes is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
That's right.
So that is something that they really stick to. And so actually, whenever there is a recession going on in certain industries, that's whenever they really start looking for options and answers to help with their optimization, margins, whatever the case may be, to be a better performing company. So a lot of times I always tell clients in Europe, listen, in your industry, things are not looking too good in the United States. Start knocking on their doors because you have very high quality products or products that add to the margins that they're looking for. So they're going to be a lot more interested. Like whenever the oil bust happened back in the 2014 to 2016. Before that, it was very hard for European companies to get in the door with a lot of the oil companies here in the United States. But during that period of time, the doors were open. They were looking for solutions and options to increase performances, volumes, reduce costs, etc. And so all of a sudden we saw a lot of success coming from Europe, providing a lot of that technology to that segment. And so what I would say is if you see things that are not going so well in the industry, don't be discouraged. Actually be a lot more proactive because it's easier to get in the door when things are broken in the United States. They're looking for solutions.
Boom and bust, so to speak. A little bit of both. But yeah, let's dive into the next segment of the show, which we lovingly call the Core Four.
Next up, the Core Four.
That may be a familiar concept from my book, your Core Four team members for a successful U.S. business operations or market entry: lawyer, CPA/tax advisor, and the banker, you, and the insurance broker. But these are also the same 4 questions I ask every guest on every episode to help us better understand your experience and, of course, also the advice for European companies doing business in the US. So the first one is about challenges. What are, in your opinion, the biggest challenges European businesses face in the US market? And how do you, as the banker, help them overcome these?
Yeah, I would say, like you said, it's hiring the right people to take care of them as soon as possible. And so definitely working with the experienced guys. I would say that the 2 most important items would be having the right attorney because from a legal perspective, you're going to get into a lot of contracts. So once you start doing sales or hire people or insurance or even get loans from banks, you have to talk to the attorney. And the attorney essentially should be probably on your number 1 list of dialing to basically make sure that everything is properly documented. What are some things that could be of concern and risk and liability? So because in the United States, people are afraid of the lawsuits. It does happen, but what's important is if you have all the right documentations in place, that reduces that risk tremendously. So I would say that would probably be a very important focus to make sure that you have the right law firm you're working with that can do multiple different things to make sure you're in a good spot. I would say after that is probably your tax advisor is going to be very important because of IRS situations and making sure from a tax perspective, you're doing everything correct because I could say bank because through a bank, that's the only way you receive payments and revenues. But, even the IRS can freeze a bank account and they get priority over anybody if there's been something that was done improperly. And we see that a lot. I get from time to time emails from the IRS. Well, Comerica gets emails from the IRS that then goes to me that says this bank account is frozen or these funds are frozen because they didn't pay or there was an issue with the tax situation. So it's critical that they make sure that that's done properly and correctly. And then I would say after that is basically, probably your bank and HR people, making sure that from an HR perspective, you have the right people, the right benefits, the right salary in place, and bank account, because without that, you're not able to make payments to all the different vendors or receive payments from your clientele. And then not saying insurance is not important, it's actually very important, but at some point in time, you put that into place so that if there's a situation, whether it's general liability, workman's comp, or anything of that, you have some financial protection to your business so the impact is not as severe.
So, for question number 2, lessons learned. If you could only give one piece of advice to a European company entering the US for the very first time, what would it be?
Gosh, I'm a talker. So,
Not
I'm
necessarily bad advice.
I think the first thing is maybe finding the right network of a team that will help you get into the United States, that'll lay the groundwork for you. I know it's a cheat answer because it goes back to getting the right legal, accounting, banking, insurance set up. But, all too often, I've also seen companies that come in, they just go to a random law firm, or they go to a random CPA, or they just go to a branch on the corner. You start talking to those people, and then they end up in a network that has nothing to do with either the industry they're in, or has nothing to do with, helping foreign-owned companies, that has nothing to do with providing the basis for getting revenues going on. So I think ultimately is the network, whether you do it in your home country and you start talking to networks over there to get into the right networks, or you figure out the network in the United States. But essentially the network is number one thing. And if you're in the right network, everything falls into place typically. That's what I've seen. The clients that do the worst are in a network that has nothing to do with international stuff and has nothing to do with their industries that they're pursuing. Those have the hardest time.
The realtor is going to say location, location, location. You're going to say network, network, network. So I like that approach.
100%.
I like that.
100% network, because even in my career, whenever I started my career, I was very focused on myself, very focused on making cold calling, just randomly emailing people, randomly just doing my own thing. And it was hard. It was tough. But then whenever you have a network of like-minded people that pursue the same market, my career today, I'm older and more experienced, et cetera, you could say, but it's my network that brings me a lot of business. And if I'm focusing on something really, really hard today, is my network, taking care of my network, and then receiving reward from my network for taking care of my network.
Why you join us at Oktoberfest, for example, in Munich, right?
It was a great networking event. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes.
I think more of that needs to happen.
We're working on that. But question number 3 of the core 4, future outlook. What trends do you see shaping the business environment for, of course, European companies in the US over the next few years? What do you think will happen?
Yeah, so I think that, I see more and more where people need a lot of different solutions and different qualities of products. And so technically speaking, as long as companies keep pushing for going abroad and trying to invest abroad, because that's where sometimes my concern comes from, is they think, well, because of the political circumstances, maybe I should just continue to concentrate, or maybe I'm just happy enough with what I'm doing in my own country or within my own region. And that's not something that will help you in the long run, because at some point in time, the competition is going to come into your region anyway. So why not be the one that develops, diversifies, and goes out and try to get more market share in other places as well? The news is not always great what the news says, but at the end of the day, people in the United States still want to do business. They still want to be successful. That's very important to them. And to be successful, that also means that they look at different things and products, and they want different things to improve their products or services or whatever the case may be. And there's so much great things coming from Europe, and I think they have to continue to push for, the products that they have, and continue to develop the U.S. market for themselves. So I think that's very important, is to continue to invest in opportunities abroad and push for it, and not be afraid because of what's being stated in the news. Because whenever you do sit in front of for the European companies, or whenever I sit in front of European companies, we're super curious. We enjoy the dialogue. We enjoy what's going on and have great conversations and very joyful conversations. And people quickly find out that what's happening in the media is nothing of what's actually happening in the business world. So I would say continue investing and pushing for expanding the markets and not be the one that's stuck where all of a sudden the market came, the competition came to bear.
Yeah, and you already mentioned success now a few times, and then obviously as the fourth question of the core four, well, we're looking at success factors, and I always have to read this one off because otherwise I'm getting it wrong. But what do you think sets successful European companies here in the US apart from the, quote, not so successful ones that may never reach their financial potential or even exit the US market again after a few years? What do you think is the difference there?
Yeah, so from my perspective, the ones, because I keep track of some of the statistics on our side too, we keep statistics on how long does it take for a Dutch company to be successful, or a German company, or a UK company to be successful. And then we ask questions to see how did they achieve their success. And then we also keep track of those that exit the market or not doing as well. And it goes back to getting into the network and hiring the right people. I know it's a cliche to say you got to hire the right people and get the right network. I mean, that's always been the case. That's, I think, business 101. But it's with the right people and the right network that basically you get to where you need to be in order to be successful. The ones that do well and do really well are typically the ones that send a couple guys or ladies from their parent company into the United States and essentially hired into the network and work with the network. That have been the ones that have done very well and integrate with the network, integrate with the society that they're trying to pursue. I've seen situations where sometimes, even the heavy accent to an American or the name is difficult. And once they see a certain name or get on the phone and they hear the accent, they quickly get turned off by it. And I hate to say that because, lots of good people from everywhere. Is not throwing the Scots under the bus, but to give you an example, or same with the Indians, deal with a lot of good Scottish companies, a lot of Indians, but they speak English, right? But it's hard sometimes for the Americans to understand the English that's going on. And so, talk to American companies and they say, that's not attractive to them, because then they're trying to figure out what's the conversation about that they are having versus being in the mindset of the business. And so again, it goes back to hiring within the network that they're pursuing and being comfortable with that. So you mentioned location. For me, it's still network and hiring locals that are in the network.
Great. And I think I have a feeling that the next segment of the show will be a bit more difficult for you to master because it's the rapid fire, this or that. You said you're a talker. And I will tell you, you can only pick one answer. There's 6 questions and you have to pick one answer and one answer only. So you ready?
Okay, here we go.
And now, rapid fire, this or that.
First question, East Coast or West Coast?
East Coast.
Second question, coffee or tea?
Coffee.
Email or phone call?
Phone call.
Conference calls or in-person meetings?
In-person meetings.
American or European business hours?
American.
Final question, burger or sushi?
Man, that makes me a terrible person, I guess.
No worries. There's no judgment. That's why it's
not
quick and easy, rapid fire. So final segment of the show. Before we close things up, obviously you came from Europe to the US. You went to college. What was your first impression then of doing business in America? Did you have any culture shock experiences or anything like that?
I will be honest. I was probably a bit arrogant whenever I came here. Maybe not the right words to use, but I've certainly thought that, what I had learned back in Europe was probably better than what some of the Americans had learned over here. So I certainly had a little bit of that going on, especially, the education system in Europe from a high school perspective, and you've probably seen it too, is a little bit more advanced from a high school perspective. Not that high school here is not advanced. They have also different layers. But whenever you get into college, there's a lot of topics that they teach you that we already learned in high school. And so the first 2 years of going to college over here were honestly very, very easygoing because it's very generalist and stuff like that we know already. But then I noticed as I got and delved more deeper into conversations with a lot of my American friends and saw the society and their technology that they are actually very advanced, and that while they're have some nice material things going on, they're very friendly and very helpful, and they love to network and have more friends and have more conversations. And so connecting with people has been quite easy and making friends here, and very, very friendly environment to be in and enjoy.
And if you had to describe American business culture in 3 words, what would they be?
Profit margins, success, growth. I mean,
Right.
that's my conversation with them, or with my middle market guys. They go after the American companies. That's whenever I go to credit committee to talk about loans. Those are the questions. Where's the revenue? Did it grow? What's the margin? Did that grow? Is it looking very profitable? What's the success? Are they getting into different markets, different segments, diversifying themselves so that if there are situations that they'll be fine? That's key things that we keep asking about and going after and looking at.
So then what's your favorite US city to visit for business and why?
For
There's no real
business.
string for business, yes, not pleasure, because we all know you're going to Vegas for that. That was a joke, just for the record.
I've been very surprised with Houston. I've been very surprised with Houston because Houston, you think of Texas, you think of, especially coming from Europe, cowboy, you think of, they're slow or whatever you want to say. There's not that many people that live in Texas. It's a huge state, but not as populated. You couldn't be more wrong about it. And I feel like it's one of the best kept secrets in the United States. And so the amount of business going on in Houston is huge. Like, even if Comerica asked me to move somewhere else, I would have a hard time because it's just, for my line of business, so much going on in this city, and it continues to grow. The population continues to grow. The amount of businesses coming here continues to grow. What I always tell a lot of companies is Texas has the most S&P 500 headquarters in all of the United States. And I'm not saying Houston particularly has that. Houston has a focus on certain industries, but certainly all of those industries have to be supplied by various providers. And so it's just been very surprising. I mean, whenever I moved to Texas in 2001, I think there were only 20 million people that lived in Texas. Today, it's greater than 30 million people. So that goes to show how many people have moved to Texas over the years and why that's been such a great business place to go. Lots of other great cities, but it's been great. And it just, from a business perspective, just continues to surprise me all the time of how fast it's growing.
Because you mentioned network, I want to ask you this question as well. So if you could have dinner or lunch or coffee, your pick, with any American business leader, past or present, who do you think would that be and why?
That's a tough question because, right? Gosh, I hate to destroy myself on this one, but one person I find very fascinating, and it's going to probably kill me too, is Jamie Dimon. I find him like a very fascinating person, and what he has done also very fascinating. I would love to learn and tap his brain, I suppose, see how he defines success and how he continues to push for success, for sure.
And I think Jamie Dimon, just to clarify for those who don't know him, he is pretty much the new icon at JP Morgan Chase Bank.
Yeah. He's the CEO of JP.
So, as we're wrapping things up here, and you and I obviously sit in the same boat, advising European companies, trying to help them make it big in America, as we say. So, what is, if you had to name one thing that you love about doing that, about your job, helping those European companies and their subsidiaries here in the US?
Yeah, I think that I get a lot of joy from basically helping business owners become more successful and how to basically approach the market. A lot of times whenever I do my presentations on banking, can be quite fascinating, but oftentimes I jump into how important it is to basically hire the right people and how to network and continue to develop that network to continue to be successful, and a little bit selfishly as well, because obviously whenever we look at the bank accounts, we want to see either the deposits are increasing or the revenues are loans are increasing. And so selfishly it takes care of the me as well in the long run. But it's always sad to see whenever business owners have great products and they don't make it in the States. They don't break through that barrier to sell in the United States. And so technically it has nothing to do with a banking perspective, but it has something to do with, creating that relationship and just seeing that relationship, unfortunately not do as well. So for me, it's more of, try to help them see what the issues are and not look at it from a banking perspective or from a legal perspective or from an accounting perspective. I will ask those questions at some point in time, but my real questions are, what's your product? What have you done? How are you going to penetrate the market? Have you thought of all these other variables in order to sell in the market? And then that takes care of everything else, essentially. But it's the sales side that's really important. And so just helping to push for those sales and what they need to do in order to get through to make those sales.
Okay, so what if I'm a viewer of this episode or listener of this episode, and I think to myself, oh my God, look at Aryan. He's such a great guy. I want to talk to him. I want to work with him. I want him to be my banker. How can they reach out to you?
Sure. So basically what I would say is make sure that you connect first with Manny. So no, but in seriousness, one of the critical things that companies need to do, the entrepreneurs need to do, is establish themselves in the United States. So really, once they're interested to get into the United States and develop that, your attorney and your accountant are going to be very critical in order to establish an entity in the United States. And then the bank account comes afterwards, after that's been established. And so while I can say, essentially I always love to give out my details. And so I'll give that here in a second, but I'm ultimately going to say, have you first talked to, in this case, attorney, which is Manny, to get all of those things in place. And then you can reach out to me. But essentially, do I just give my email address?
Your email, your LinkedIn, your Snapchat, your TikTok, your social media, everything that you have that you want to share. And obviously we'll put it in the show notes as well. But I think if you want to keep it professional, yes, your email address, and then people can most likely find you online, I would say, right?
Yeah. So email address is AA, and then my last name, DOKHT at Comerica.com. Or you can call my phone number as well, 214-405-2456. But yeah, I'm always available, always like to talk and help. So I really, really appreciate that.
So I have one final question for you, and that is one thing that currently excites you as a person or interests you in life. So anything you personally enjoy right now, like knitting or your baseball card collection, what is it? Share it with us.
It's sad to say, but I call it collecting countries and collecting events in countries. And so, Manny was very kind enough to show me Oktoberfest. I've been to Germany many, many times, but it's things like that, going to events like that is a lot of fun for me. So
Real Oktoberfest, right? The one in Munich.
The real Oktoberfest, the one that was originally established, and then the history behind it. That's what I enjoy. In countries, like I said, I've been to only 20 countries so far. So every year I try to increase that by at least 2.
So that's it, Aryan. I really appreciate having you on. Thanks again for joining us today. Of course, I wish you personally nothing but the best for the future, business and personally, of course. And thank you for being on. And that's it for today.
No, thank you. Appreciate it. Thanks so much. And enjoyed it. And also working with you and for listeners, Manny Schoenhuber has really, really helped my clients and has done an amazing job. All my sources will say the same thing, that they've had a real impact because of working with him. So, no, thank you.
I appreciate the compliment. And for the record, we did not rehearse this prior to Aryan saying that, just to be sure. I appreciate it. Very kind of you. Thanks to everyone listening. We'll see you next time. Wait, before you sign off, there are a few in-person events I will be presenting at soon. On February 5th, 2026 in Stuttgart, on February 11th, 2026 in Cologne, and on February 12th, 2026 in Frankfurt, all of course in Germany. Please consider registering, and if you do, please reach out to let me know. There's nothing like meeting in person. The registration links are in the show notes. And of course, if you enjoyed the episode, please subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends and family. Also, please interact with me by liking my episodes, or better yet, leave a comment and review. I would love to hear from you. And yes, I personally read all the feedback and comments. Now, this time for real. Thank you for tuning in. Until next time.